Hello, everybody. Welcome to ARC PDX. I'm Wesley Ogle. ARC PDX is on the road this morning at Lone Wolf Watering Hole in South Portland. We are just a few blocks away from the ICE facility, which has been the home of months-long protests, which have ramped up since President Trump announced the deployment of the National Guard here to Portland. We're at this location here because we want to show you what the neighborhood around the ICE facility looks like, even just a few blocks away. And we also have a lot of lights. As I say that, of course, the street lights just went out, so it's getting a little bit darker here. But we have a lot of lights, we have a lot of equipment here, and we just don't want to bring any, unnecessary tension or disruptions over there to what is going on outside the ICE facility. ARC PDX's Daryl Burke is standing by. He is at the ICE facility, so we're going to check in with him in just a few minutes to check on what's going on out there this morning. This morning, we are diving into how this is impacting the immediate area. We're digging into the contrast of the peaceful protests during the day and how things get more tense and sometimes violent in the evenings. Local leaders and community members are joining us live to discuss those concerns, as well as the concerns of troop deployment in Portland. It all started with this post from Truth Social by President Trump on Saturday morning, where he directed Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to protect, quote, war-ravaged Portland and any ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. He goes on to say, quote, I am also authorizing full force if necessary. The president has maintained his commitment to sending troops to Portland. Here's a speech earlier this week referring to ongoing protests outside the ICE facility and his recent phone call with Oregon Governor Tina Kotek.
And I get a call from the liberal governor, sir, please don't come in. We don't need you. I said, well, unless they're playing false tapes, this looked like World War II. I said, this place is a nightmare. It's certainly not the biggest, but it's one of the worst. It's brutal.
As for the National Guard, they could be deployed to Portland as early as this weekend. 200 troops are currently training at Camp Rylea in Warrenton before they arrive here in Portland. Troops are being trained on things like crowd control and the rules for use of force. Plus, in just a few hours, there's going to be a pivotal hearing on the temporary restraining order filed by the state of Oregon to stop the deployment of troops before it happens. We are going to be taking a closer look at that later on in our show. But for now, we have Mitch Green, Portland City Councilor, who represents District 4, which is this district, so you cover South Waterfront. So from your perspective, from what you're hearing from constituents here, what is going on, especially nightly, at the ICE facility here?
Well, I'm hearing that it's really quite disruptive, especially the helicopter that hovers overhead at a quite low. Things were really kind of pretty calm, not without disturbances, but more or less small numbers at the ICE facility until Donald Trump escalated the situation with his post and then threatened to bring in troops. And so I've definitely felt the tension rise a little bit. But as you'll notice, the rest of the city's feeling pretty good, feeling pretty vibrant.
Do you think that the city and Portland police did enough to avoid this kind of attention?
Well, I think that, Donald Trump is sort of like the Eye of Sauron, right? He's had his sights on Portland for a really long time because he doesn't like our values, he doesn't like who we are. And so I think that, I don't know if we could have sort of placated him anymore, but I think what I feel really confident in is I've got some colleagues who've been preparing legislation to protect us and codify in law to make sure that we're robust against an administration like this.
And do you think that the city and police have these protests under control?
Absolutely. We do not need outside help.
What do you think that the city and Portland police, besides that legislation, what could they be doing right now to maybe calm the tension or to avoid this attention on Portland?
Well, I think it's really important that the Portland police continues to take a sort of hands-off stance, really try to minimize their participation in co-location with any of these federal officers, which I think they've been doing a good job at. They must not be a force multiplier in this moment, but I think my colleagues, the mayor, who's done a great job, by the way, all of us need to sort of use our voices to communicate directly to Portlanders that it's certainly okay to use our First Amendment rights to protest, as long as we're, I think, being smart about it, not throwing our bodies against a building like the ICE building.
Mm-hmm. And you are a veteran. Thank you so much for your service. You recently posted a video online. You called on veterans to protest this deployment of National Guard troops, but you also called on some active duty National Guard troops to, quote, disobey unlawful orders. So are you really telling them to disobey these orders? And why are you taking that stance?
The United States military has a pretty long tradition of service members facing that moral quandary when they receive an order, a deployment order. Vietnam, this was quite common, and saying, you know, I don't think this is right, and I do not want to comply with this. And so it's certainly a risk for soldiers, airmen, Marines when they make that choice. But I wanted to communicate that as a choice that they always get to make. And
do they really? They really have that choice?
Yeah,
to disobey?
I mean, you are not. There are consequences to disobeying, but you always get to choose.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are those consequences, though? Like, do you think those consequences are worth it for these troops to do that?
That's for every soldier to make. I mean, during the Vietnam era war era, there were soldiers who were, civilians who were sort of drafted and faced orders to go to Vietnam. They chose not to, and they faced significant consequences. But I think that they lived with a good heart after that, knowing that they didn't participate in an action that they thought was out of step with the values of the country and the Constitution.
Interesting. A judge, this is going back a little bit, but a judge kind of recently sided with the city, saying that Portland police are not required to enforce the noise ordinance rules outside the ICE facility. But your constituents live here. We've been hearing from some of them that it is still disrupting them at night. They're not able to get sleep. They're not able to get peace and quiet when they have to go to work in the morning. What are you willing to do now, since, you know, that lawsuit's been kind of settled? What are you willing to do now to help those constituents out with the noise piece of this?
Yeah, so I think my role in all this is to use the very large platform that I have and speak directly to sort of the activist community, organizers, and urge a different style of approach to this. I think standing outside front of that building every night has limited utility, and I would urge folks to sort of join an organization, get deeply involved in ways of resistance that are not just continuing to stand against an awesome force, an overwhelming force at a building.
Yeah, I know there's something coming up here on Sunday that you're holding, and I want to give you a chance to tell people about that.
Yeah, so on Sunday I'm calling a sort of rally with some veterans at 2 p.m. in front of City Hall. And we are going to discuss forms of resistance in the history of soldiers kind of choosing not to obey. Talk about the consequences of that. You'll hear from some Vietnam-era medics who, you know, came back from that experience thinking that one of the highest tasks we have is to kind of have this discussion about ways of resisting even in the armed forces. And so I'm expecting a good turnout for that. I do want to emphasize that this is not a light choice that a service member needs to make, but it is still their choice.
Mitch Green, Portland City Councilor, District 4, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right, protests were largely peaceful on Saturday. Our crews saw a few instances where things did get physical. So we are going to go now live to the ICE facility because our PDX's Daryl Burke has been there each morning this week. So Daryl, right now, how are things looking and feeling out there?
Yeah, Wes, it's a little bit past 7 a.m. It's still a little bit quiet out here. There are a few protesters that are on this side of things, kind of behind the camera. You can't see them, but if we kind of pan the camera over to our left there, you can kind of see some of the demonstrators over there. That's their 24/7 watch spot. That's where they've been all week. Protesters have been telling me they always have somebody over there. And, you know, a lot of perception and reality is going on here. You know, what's been perceived is that these protests go on all day and all night. Well, that's just not true based off my experience, at least this week, because the mornings have been sort of on the quiet side and the activity sort of picks up at nighttime. And so we want to get to last night because our cameras caught this fight between demonstrators. You can see a Trump supporter in the white shirt and a protester in a black hoodie exchanging blows outside the ICE facility in the driveway there. Portland police confirming that both men were arrested and booked on charges of disorderly conduct, and another person was also arrested. Protesters tell us they don't want these kind of isolated situations to give this movement a bad reputation.
I am here because I've seen the injustice that ICE, not only in our city but across the country, has done. I've seen families split up wrongfully, people detained who have no criminal record. I've heard of multiple deaths happening in detention centers, and sitting by and seeing that happen didn't feel right. It left me with a pit in my stomach, and I needed to get on the ground and do something. And I knew people were protesting out here. I knew people needed community, and I wanted to be a part of that.
The president's using certain rhetoric like war zone, war ravage, it's chaos, death, destruction,
Right.
the ICE facility is on fire. When you hear all of that as somebody who's on the ground out here, what's your reaction to that description from the outside?
I laugh and I giggle at it. It's not a war zone. Nobody has fire bombs. Plus, it is so not an active war zone that I can go home and zone out everything. I'm able to go to bed without having bombs above my head, and I don't have to worry about walking the streets of my city. Not only that, it's brought together all of us, all of Portland, to understand that there's no war zone. We've shared the beauty in our city before. And all you have to do is not only ask the people in the apartment buildings behind us, but probably in the cars behind us as well, do you love your city, and is your city a war zone? And they will tell you the exact same thing.
On Tuesday night, our crew saw at least 4 arrests after clashes between protesters and federal officers. In this video, you can see federal agents tackling a protester to the ground, and moments later, the agents push another protester to the ground. Tensions further escalated. In this clip showing agents face-to-face with protesters, as you can see, one of the demonstrators being dragged as agents attempted to clear the driveway in front of the ICE facility. And so that speaks to some of these isolated situations that typically happen at night. But as far as the conditions in the morning, what we've been monitoring throughout the week, it's pretty quiet out here, but protesters have made their presence known in the morning, at least, as well. It's more of them, of course, at nighttime, but they're still out here in the morning too. But that is what things look like right now. Those are current conditions. Obviously, all eyes are on that hearing later this morning, where a judge will be tasked with making a ruling on that temporary restraining order. So a lot of eyes are going to be on that. It just had a judge was replaced in that case that got replaced with another judge. And so a lot of moving parts this morning. But that's where we are as far as what this looks like outside the ICE facility. Not a lot going on.
Welcome back, everybody, to ARC PDX. We are taking a closer look at the timeline of the protests at the ICE facility here in South Portland. Protests started at the ICE facility in early June after several asylum seekers were arrested outside immigration court in Portland. The first record of Portland police intervention was on June 7th when officers helped federal agents clear the driveway of the facility after protesters blocked it. On June 8th, PPB arrested 2 people they say were spray painting the building. Between June 11th and 12th, police arrested 13 people outside the facility. 2 of them were charged with assault. PPB says some of them started fires near the building. On June 14th, hours after tens of thousands of people peacefully marched for the No Kings protest, PPB declared a gathering at the ICE facility a riot, and 3 people were arrested. Between June 15th and 18th, PPB arrested 8 more people on charges including attempted assault, criminal mischief, and criminal trespass. On June 24th, the Department of Homeland Security made 2 arrests, alleging one suspect pointed a laser at an ICE officer and one threw a grenade at federal officers, hitting 2 of them. Days later, on June 29th, DHS made another arrest. Then on September 1st, protesters rolled out a makeshift guillotine during a protest. And this past Sunday, after the president announced the deployment of the National Guard, PPB made 2 targeted arrests. They say the suspects were part of a fight between protesters and counter-protesters. Then on Tuesday, DHS claims that 100 rioters stormed the building. Our crews were on the scene from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and they say there were roughly 40 people at any given time. We followed up with DHS to ask how it reached such a high number, whether it was aggregated or maybe something happened after our crew left the scene. DHS did not answer the questions, and they responded again with the claim that 100 rioters stormed the building. On Wednesday, PPB asked the public for help locating a woman who allegedly assaulted somebody the previous night. And then last night, Portland police arrested 3 people for disorderly conduct. In all, PPB has made at least 27 arrests. The Portland FBI field office says it has made 128 arrests on federal charges. 28 cases are currently making their way through the courts. And as the protests continue at the ICE facility, a local church is protesting the deployment of federal troops in a different way. Earlier this week, Augustana Lutheran Church held an interfaith service. The service welcomed everybody from the community. The church says it was a peaceful resistance to the president's deployment of troops to Portland, and everybody was welcome. It featured community leaders and even some local music, all in the name of solidarity. We're just a few blocks away from the ICE facility, which has been the home of those months-long protests, which have ramped up since President Donald Trump announced the deployment of National Guard troops here to Portland. So this morning, we are diving into how this is impacting the immediate area, and we're digging into the contrast of the peaceful protests during the day and how things get more tense and, yes, sometimes violent in the evening. A pivotal hearing for the state of Oregon, or state of Oregon's attempt to stop the National Guard troops from deploying to Portland, is set to go on as scheduled this morning. It comes after a federal judge originally on the case recused himself at the Justice Department's request. The Trump administration had claimed that Judge Michael Simon should not be on the case because he's married to Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici. She has publicly spoken out against the deployment. Yesterday, Judge Simon stepped back. The case has been randomly reassigned to Judge Karen Immergut, who was appointed by President Donald Trump during his first term. The state is calling for a temporary restraining order and argues that there is no rebellion and that the president's action is government overreach. Meanwhile, the Trump administration argues that the protests or the acts of violence at ICE facilities that directly inhibit the execution of laws constitutes a form of rebellion. In a June 7th memo, the White House said that violent protests were threatening agents who were just trying to do their job. This came during protests in Los Angeles. The memo also cited a need to protect federal property. The Portland memo mentions that original directive and says the Guard will be here to protect property where protests are occurring or are likely to occur. We are on the road this morning for ARC. We're talking to local and state leaders ahead of the deployment of troops to Portland. So joining us now live this morning is Senator Jeff Merkley. Senator, thank you so much for joining us for ARC PDX.
Great to be with you.
So now that the judge in the TRO hearing today recused himself, what does this mean for this case? And does that change how you expect this hearing to go today?
No, not at all. It shouldn't have any impact. Whenever there is a potential conflict of interest, in this case, the federal government said, hey, there may be some bias because you're married to a member of Congress. And the judge said, you're right, there might be some bias, so I'll step aside. And I'm not saying he is biased, but recognizes the potential perception of conflict of interest. That's exactly what judges are supposed to do in a situation. For example, let's say they're hearing a case that involves a company, but they own stock in that company. Well, it would be appropriate for them to step aside. And it just means another judge it's assigned to, and that other judge, I'm sure, will do a fine job.
So what if the state's temporary restraining order request is not granted today? What happens next? What will you be paying attention to?
Well, it'll hopefully be appealed if it's allowed to be, but that's sometimes not possible when you lose a temporary restraining order. I must say that I want people to understand that to call up and federalize Oregon National Guard without the permission of the governor requires establishing that there is either an invasion or a rebellion. And in the kind of the definition that was established when these laws were written, a rebellion meant that you had a violent, armed, organized group that is against the government as a whole and is threatening the overthrow of the government. That is clearly not what is happening here. So I do hope the district judge says the test is not met. But there's a lot of discretion given to a president of the United States, and for that reason, we don't know where the judge will come out. May say it's dubious, but the president has discretion, so I'm not going to give a temporary restraining order and just bump it up to another court. But I really hope that there's a profound line, a red line against using military troops against people demonstrating in the United States of America. And they're used often against people who are peacefully demonstrating, and to be able to raise your voice and say, I disagree with the policy, that's all American as apple pie. That's not a rebellion against the government as a whole.
So President Trump, I mean, as you've been hearing, is calling Portland a hellscape, a nightmare, a war zone. What's your response to him?
You know, he said, maybe I've been watching the wrong tapes. And yeah, President, probably you have been watching tapes from 2020 when there was a tremendous conflict, and that conflict was actually amplified by the President Trump during his first term, sending out federal agents who did not wear any sort of personal identifier And so you didn't even know if they had legal authority to stop people, and they were grabbing people off the street and throwing them into unmarked vans. Unmarked police throwing people into unmarked vans is a symbol of an authoritarian or even a fascist state. And that's why I've introduced legislation saying that every agent has to be identifiable either by a number or by a name and what unit they represent, so people know that they actually have authority to be where they are. But what Trump is trying to do is to create conflict and then use that conflict to expand authoritarian powers. We are in a very dangerous moment now, the most dangerous moment for our Constitution since the Civil War. And so I'm encouraging everyone, don't play his game. He wants a violent interaction to increase his authoritarian power. So don't give it to him. Don't take the bait.
Do you happen to have an updated timeline on when troops could be on the ground here in Portland?
As of last night, I was told it could be as early as Saturday and as late as next Wednesday. The number of days of training that were planned were 3 to 5 days of training. And though, of course, that could change. Everything's kind of by the seat of its pants type of operation here. So that's the best we have. Could be tomorrow, and it could be the middle of next week.
So what is your message to the National Guard troops who are being deployed? What are you wanting to tell them?
The most important thing is never touch a peaceful protester. What we saw in 2020, you might remember the video of the Navy veteran who's standing there, and the federal agents run up and start clubbing him. If my memory's right, they broke a bone, they knocked him to the ground. It was horrific. And multiple things happened like that, like a person was shot in the head, a peaceful protester. I don't know if it was a rubber bullet, but it fractured his skull. And those stories of attacks on peaceful protesters just boil the blood of everyone who loves our Constitution, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of protest. That is what it's about in government of, by, and for the people. The people have a chance to make their views known. So do not, no matter what your instructions are, do not touch a peaceful protester. If an arrest is occurring because somebody is violent, well, then that's something that actually should be taken care of by local police. In fact, that's the point here. So there is, first, nothing that constitutes a rebellion that would justify the federalization of these troops. Second of all, it is very important that they not play a role of contributing to a cycle of violence.
So, you know, if you're saying that you're not seeing what Donald Trump is saying is happening out here and you're not seeing a rebellion, then why do you think President Trump is sending troops here and is putting so much attention on Portland?
Well, a couple things. One is he wants to distract from other things. Prices are going up on health care. And of course, that's because of this, what he called his big, beautiful bill. That's a big, ugly betrayal. And those prices are going to be shocking people in November when they review. And that's why we have a government shutdown. The Republicans want to sustain this savage attack on Americans' health care. And second of all, his tariffs are driving up prices on all kinds of things, groceries. His energy policies are driving up the price of utilities. He wants to distract from all that. And he has this authoritarian impulse. People ask, is it possible he'll declare an emergency in other ways that might affect the next election? And 6 months ago, I said, no, I just can't imagine that happening. Now people can imagine it happening because he's used emergency powers, including what he's doing right now with the federalization of the Oregon National Guard, in ways that break all the boundaries and make absurd the interpretation of terms that are in the law, terms like rebellion. And realize what he said to the generals. He said, I'm giving you a loyalty test. You don't like what I'm doing? Walk out of this room. You'll lose your rank and your career. Like, you have to be loyal to me, not to the Constitution, but to me. And then he proceeded to say that some of you will be sent to organize the militarization, occupation of cities as a training ground, as training. Well, training for what? Training for further deployment of the military in the future to suppress dissent. And why does he anticipate dissent? Because he's pursuing an authoritarian agenda, breaking due process, breaking and attacking freedom of speech, breaking freedom of assembly, breaking freedom of the press. All of these are incredibly un-American assaults on our liberties, and he anticipates dissent, and he wants the ability to use the military domestically to address it.
I want to hear a little bit more about that legislation that you were just talking about introducing. Part of it is making sure that federal officers are identifying who they are and who they're with. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and the timeline of that, and if that you really think could actually get passed?
Well, I'm asking for a vote on it, on the Defense Authorization Act. And we'll see. Republicans have the ability to veto the ability for any amendment to be voted on. But I'm basically saying if any amendments are voted on, this has to be one of them. Would it pass? Maybe. I mean, it should be concern of Republicans as well as Democrats not to have unmarked individuals that you don't even know if they have any legitimate role on the street grabbing you during a protest. And how are you supposed to respond? Is this person really an officer or not an officer? Are they just kidnapping you? Or are they just maybe somebody from the opposite side of the political spectrum who wants to issue you orders, and they have no right to do so because they have no idea about, and it doesn't have to be their name, by the way. The administration keeps saying, well, we don't want ID on people because they might be doxxed. That is, people might protest them individually. Well, put a number on them, a number or a name and a unit, so we know that they're legitimate and the folks that they're approaching and issuing instructions to know they're legitimate.
You know, something I've heard people talk about too down here is about the location of the ICE facility. You know, it's right across from apartments, and a lot of the complaints here are about the noise at night from what's happening out there. Who has the authority to move a federal building like that? Is that an option in this case?
Well, it is an option, but not a near-term option. If the facility was just to shut down, then the folks who are brought to that facility would instead be taken directly to Tacoma. I heard from the lawyers who support those who are being detained that it would be much harder for them to gain access and present themselves to, well, even to find out where their potential client had been taken, let alone be able to get in and be able to provide legal advice. So it's valuable to the defense of due process to have a facility nearby, but I certainly wish it wasn't in downtown Portland.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Senator Jeff Merkley, really appreciate your time this morning on this really important topic. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for reporting on it and being right down there on the waterfront to do so. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back to ARC PDX, everybody. We are on the road here in the South Waterfront. This is the neighborhood where the ICE facility is and where you've been seeing those protests. So we wanted to be on the ground here talking to locals about what it's really been like. So we actually have Chris Johnson here. He's the owner of All Your Heart Coffee. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, of course. You're welcome.
Thank you. So we are a few blocks away from the ICE facility, and you're just like a block away from where we are right now.
Exactly.
So what have you been experiencing since these protests really picked up this summer?
Yeah, you know, I think the peak of it was really right around June. Mm-hmm. That's when we saw the most of the activity and stuff. And from then it really just dissipated. You know, on a regular basis, I'd see anywhere from like 6 to 12 people, mostly just local people who are interested. We have a lot of generations, age-wise and stuff. I see a lot of people early 20s, but I also see people 60 to 80 years old as well.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And just to set, to let people know, like, it is very different here in the morning and the daytime than it is at night.
Absolutely.
But you have been here, you said at like 10, 11 p.m. What's the atmosphere like around those hours when things do kind of pick up more?
You know, it becomes louder.
Yeah.
A lot of times what we're hearing and seeing and stuff is the activity from the actual ICE building itself. More recently, a helicopter floating over. I hear from a lot of our customers mm-hmm. and a lot of the residents, and that it's been really distracting, hard to sleep.
Yeah.
But definitely that's when the activity starts to pick up. But it's been pretty calm. Like, we talk to a lot of the protesters. They frequent our coffee shop. Mm-hmm. They use our restroom. Mm-hmm. And everyone traditionally, has been peaceful, nice. They're just very passionate about sharing their thoughts.
Have you seen any impact to your business in terms of financial impacts, amount of customers coming in, vandalism, anything like that?
No, this is a safe community. I think the South Waterfront is really a bubble.
Yeah,
it feels.
I've lived here.
Yeah,
It is.
it feels really nice. And as far as the business and stuff, like people love routine. Like, they're still coming in smiling. There's more conversation around what's going on, but for the most part, it feels like, business as usual.
So do you think that National Guard troops are needed here at the ICE facility?
Absolutely not. I don't think that narrative that we're hearing on a national level makes any sense for what I'm seeing. It's peaceful down here. It's quiet. I think, Portland is a very strong city, and we can definitely take care of ourselves. We have good communications and stuff. When, police come down there, if there are concerns or anything else and stuff, like everything seems to die down, and on a national level, what I'm hearing doesn't match at all what I'm seeing.
Okay, yeah. So what would your message be maybe to the people who have that other message that you don't see down here to President Trump or to the other people in the federal government that are saying it's a war zone? What's your message?
Oh, not even close to accurate. I think a lot of cities coming out of the pandemic instead had their challenges, but what I've seen in Portland is a steady improvement over the last several years. And especially when you think of, where the resources could be used or what we could be doing, I feel like it's kind of a waste. And I feel like, our National Guard does a lot of stuff great around the state here where they're fighting fires and helping to take in support. I hope that we're not pulling them from something that's more important.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the concern about the noise for the residents who live here at night, that is a concern. There's people who live right across from the street from the facility. And you talk about the helicopter and stuff. And actually recently, I'm sure as you know, a judge sided with the city saying that Portland police are not required to enforce the noise ordinance rules there. So do you think the city should be doing more? What do you think police or the city could be doing maybe to tamp down on the noise and the lack of peace sometimes at night?
Yeah, I think what I hear more commonly from the residents is lack of sleep.
Yeah.
The pepper spray, that's filtered into a lot of the buildings and stuff. Some of the buildings that are closer and stuff, people have talked about how that's affected their ability to be able to take, and breathe. Specifically with the noise, the helicopter, which has been added more recently and stuff, it's keeping people up. And for the city and or local officials and stuff to get involved and say, hey, like, why are we having a helicopter float over a residential area in addition to what we have down here? Oregon Ballet is right next door. There's charter schools down here. There's families that are down here. I don't think that that's a balanced approach to what needs to happen.
Okay.
Yep.
And as a business owner who has a location here, are you feeling any regrets about setting up shop here? Are you wondering about maybe if you should move?
No. This community has been fantastic. They've welcomed us in. It's been a good business choice. We've seen steady growth. And we love it down here. This place is a special place to me. I frequented this area as it's grown, and I just love the waterfront, so, yep.
Chris Johnson, owner of All Your Heart Coffee down here at South Waterfront. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate
you're
it.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This morning we are on the road. We are here at Lone Wolf Watering Hole on patio, just blocks away from the ICE facility in South Portland on the South Waterfront. We talked with the owner here, Jerry Differding, about how he felt about the protests in the last few months and what he's seeing now. He says the biggest challenges really for him are the noise at night and less parking being available because for businesses because of the protesters taking up some of those spots.
Honestly, the South Waterfront businesses aren't being impacted by people expressing their opinions down at the ICE building. And they should be held to the same standards as we as business are. There's noise ordinance that we are not allowed to have excessive noise after 10 o'clock at night. We're not allowed to have excessive noise before 8 o'clock in the mornings, that kind of stuff. Why are certain things looked at one way and not the other way?
And we also asked Jerry what he would say to President Trump if he had the chance.
Don't know if you drink. I got a non-alcoholic beer for you, Mr. President. Come on here, sit on our patio, watch the bald eagles fly by, watch them soar overhead, watch a gorgeous sunset come down, and then walk over there and see that there might be 20 people gathered over there and just hanging out with their signs, and using their American rights to be able to have free speech, which he's all about, is free speech. They're using their rights and they're not being unruly until they're instigated. And it's only a few, and there's always bad apples and everything, as we all know, that are causing the unrest. But yeah, come check it out. Before you say what I see on TV, why don't you come see it in person?
Now, Jerry does say that he wants to see the city of Portland stepping up to address the local concerns, especially about the noise, while also not escalating the situation. We have Mitch Green, Portland City Councilor, who represents District 4, which is this district, so you cover South Waterfront. So from your perspective, from what you're hearing from constituents here, what is going on, especially nightly, at the ICE facility here?
Well, I'm hearing that it's really quite disruptive, especially the helicopter that hovers overhead at a quite low. Things were really kind of pretty calm, not without its disturbances, but more or less small numbers at the ICE facility until Donald Trump escalated the situation with his post and then threatened to bring in troops. And so I've definitely felt the tension rise a little bit. But as you'll notice, the rest of the city's feeling pretty good, feeling pretty vibrant.
Do you think that the city and Portland Police did enough to avoid this kind of attention?
Well, I think that, you know, Donald Trump is sort of like the Eye of Sauron, right? He's had his sights on Portland for a really long time because he doesn't like our values, he doesn't like who we are. And so I think that, I don't know if we could have sort of placated him anymore, but I think what I feel really confident in is I've got some colleagues who've been preparing legislation to protect us and codify in law to make sure that we're robust against an administration like this.
And do you think that the city and police have these protests under control?
Absolutely. We do not need outside help.
What do you think that the city and Portland Police, I mean, besides that legislation, what could they be doing right now to maybe calm the tension or to avoid this attention on Portland?
Well, I think it's really important that the Portland Police continues to take a sort of hands-off stance, really try to minimize their participation in co-location with any of these federal officers, which I think they've been doing a good job at. They must not be a force multiplier in this moment, but I think my colleagues, the mayor, who's done a great job, by the way, all of us need to sort of use our voices to communicate directly to Portlanders that it's certainly okay to use our First Amendment rights to protest, as long as we're, I think, being smart about it, not throwing our bodies against a building like the ICE building.
Mm-hmm. And you are a veteran.
I
Thank
am.
you so much for your service. You recently posted a video online. You called on veterans to protest this deployment of National Guard troops, but you also called on some active duty National Guard troops to, quote, disobey unlawful orders. So are you really telling them to disobey these orders, and why are you taking that stance?
The United States military has a pretty long tradition of service members facing that moral quandary when they receive an order, a deployment order. Vietnam, this was quite common, and saying, you know, I don't think this is right, and I do not want to comply with this. And so it's certainly a risk for soldiers, airmen, Marines when they make that choice. But I wanted to communicate that as a choice that they always get to make. And
do they really? They really have that choice?
Yeah,
to disobey?
I mean, you are not. There are consequences to disobeying, but you always get to choose.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are those consequences, though? Like, do you think those consequences are worth it for these troops to do that?
That's for every soldier to make. I mean, during the Vietnam era war era, there were soldiers who were, civilians who were sort of drafted and faced orders to go to Vietnam. They chose not to, and they faced significant consequences. But I think that they lived with a good heart after that, knowing that they didn't participate in an action that they thought was out of step with the values of the country and the Constitution.
Interesting. A judge, this is going back a little bit, but a judge kind of recently sided with the city, saying that Portland police are not required to enforce the noise ordinance rules outside the ICE facility. But your constituents live here. We've been hearing from some of them that it is still disrupting them at night. They're not able to get sleep. They're not able to get peace and quiet when they have to go to work in the morning. What are you willing to do now, since that lawsuit's been kind of settled? What are you willing to do now to help those constituents out with the noise piece of this?
Yeah, so I think my role in all this is to use the very large platform that I have and speak directly to sort of the activist community, organizers, and urge a different style of approach to this. I think standing outside in front of that building every night, has limited utility. And I would urge folks to sort of join an organization, get deeply involved in ways of resistance that are not just continuing to stand against an awesome force, an overwhelming force at a building.
Yeah, I know there's something coming up here on Sunday that you're holding, and I want to give you a chance to tell people about that.
Yeah, so on Sunday, I'm calling a sort of rally with some veterans at 2 p.m. in front of City Hall. And we are going to discuss forms of resistance and the history of soldiers kind of choosing not to obey. Talk about the consequences of that. You'll hear from some Vietnam-era medics who, came back from that experience thinking that one of the highest tasks we have is to kind of have this discussion about ways of resisting even in the armed forces. And so I'm expecting a good turnout for that. I do want to emphasize that this is not a light choice that a service member needs to make, but it is still their choice.
Mitch Green, Portland City Councilor, District 4, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us on.
All right, let's take another live look outside the ICE facility. ArcPDX's Daryl Burke has been there every morning this week. So Daryl, how are things looking out there and feeling out there for you right now?
Yeah, Wes, right now things are pretty calm. There are a few more people that have showed up outside of a few demonstrators earlier this morning. Well, you can see behind me, you've got some people in the orange shirts. Those are immigration advocates. And as we pan the camera over to our left, more immigration advocates. They have an immigration setup station for, to support people in their paperwork if they need that. That's also their 24-hour watch spot. So that's where a lot of demonstrators and protesters are throughout the morning. But this is sort of setting the scene of what I've been seeing all week in the morning here. There's this bit of perception versus reality that's going on right now. Some people perceive this as going on all day and all night, and that's just not the case. But activity does pick up at night when those protests start to happen. And so our crews have caught a lot of the action on camera. So we'll toss this video right now. Just last night, our crews caught this fight on camera. You can see a Trump supporter in the white shirt and a protester in a black hoodie exchanging blows outside the ICE facility in the driveway there. Portland police confirming that both men were arrested and booked on charges of disorderly conduct, and another person was also arrested. Protesters tell us this is why they don't want these kind of isolated incidents to give their movement a bad reputation. Take a listen.
I am here because I've seen the injustice that ICE, not only in our city, but across the country, has done. I've seen families split up wrongfully, people detained who have no criminal record. I've heard of multiple deaths happening in detention centers, and sitting by and seeing that happen didn't feel right. It left me with a pit in my stomach, and I needed to get on the ground and do something. And I knew people were protesting out here. I knew people needed community, and I wanted to be a part of that.
The president's using certain rhetoric like war zone, war ravage, it's chaos, death, destruction,
Right.
The ICE facility is on fire. When you hear all of that as somebody who's on the ground out here, what's your reaction to that description from the outside?
I laugh and I giggle at it. It's not a war zone. Nobody has fire bombs. Plus, it is so not an active war zone that I can go home and zone out everything. I'm able to go to bed without having bombs above my head, and I don't have to worry about walking the streets of my city. Not only that, it's brought together all of us, all of Portland, to understand that there is no war zone. We've shared the beauty in our city before. And all you have to do is not only ask the people in the apartment buildings behind us, but probably in the cars behind us as well, do you love your city, and is your city a war zone? And they will tell you the exact same thing.
On Tuesday night, our crew saw at least 4 arrests after clashes between protesters and federal officers. In this video, you can see a federal agents tackling a protester to the ground, and moments later, those agents push another protester to the ground. Tensions further escalated in this clip showing agents face-to-face with protesters. As you can see, one of the demonstrators being dragged as agents attempted to clear the driveway in front of the ICE facility. And that sort of describes some of these isolated incidents that we've been alluding to. But as far as the all-day, all-night activity, it just is not the case based off what I've been able to see in the morning hours. Obviously, a lot of moving parts here. All eyes are on that hearing this morning on that temporary restraining order that we'll have a lot more of later on in this show. Wes?
Definitely. Yeah, Daryl, thank you so much for being out live there for us once again. Welcome back to ARC PDX. We are on the road here in the South Waterfront neighborhood. We're just blocks away from the ICE facility in South Portland. And now I have my next live interview. We've got Aaron Schmautz, the president of the Portland Police Union. Thank you so much for joining us here, Aaron. Appreciate it. Okay, so what are you, from your perspective, what are you seeing, hearing, what are you hearing from your officers about what is happening here at the ICE facility at night?
Sure. So, I mean, this has been going on now for about 120 days. Very similar to what we saw in 2020. You have kind of daytime different events, protests that are all very peaceful. And then at night, you'd have people show up who are intent engaging in violence. You'd have just different amounts of people. The real difficulty from our perspective has been just how do you bring enough people in to navigate that circumstance, but then also police the entire city. And you're also at a facility that has a lot of law enforcement within it to navigate some of that. And so it's just been kind of a constant challenge.
So do Portland police officers have the situation at the ICE facility under control? Under control
is difficult, right? I will tell you from my perspective, these ongoing kind of occupation style events are effectively impossible to police. And the real challenge is you have a lot of different perspectives. People who live down here, we've heard people say, it's just one city block, which I think is a response to the president saying that Portland itself is under siege, which is, as a city, not accurate. We've got to make sure that all of Portland is open for business, and so it makes policing this whole problem very complicated.
And how are officers feeling right now? What's the morale like?
Look, right now you see nationally some people saying that we're not doing our jobs, some people saying that we are doing our jobs, some people having very just different, disparate opinions. It's very, very difficult to be a Portland police officer and hear those different perspectives. We're here to serve. We're wanting to make sure, again, every week we're dealing with crime around the city. We had 9 homicides last month. We've had 2 very violent incidents involving our officers in the last 2 weekends. And so we're doing our job every day. And to also have this very complicated political thing it creates a lot of tension and stress.
Yeah, so thinking of where we are right now, do you think Portland Police Bureau and the city did enough to keep this under control enough or to avoid, this attention on Portland?
So again, this to me is a political problem kind of wrapped in a law enforcement problem. Okay. I think it's important. The values are set by our elected leaders. I think these ongoing occupation style events are very, very inappropriate in a society that wants to have conversations. I think our city council has been providing a lot of opportunity for people to come to City Hall and talk about these issues. We've got to keep talking about them, but again, I think, we saw in 2020 and then beyond that, our city council started doing a really good job of saying, hey, come and say your piece, but we've also got to make sure our city is open for business, and I think we got to get back to that.
So what do you expect will happen if and when these National Guard, federal troops are on the ground here at the ICE facility?
I want to be, the people who are coming to our city are American citizens, they're people in our military, they're human beings, just as the officers who are in the ICE facility. I think it's dangerous to start castigating them as individuals. They're here because they're being ordered to come. My hope is that we'll have a lot of cooperation and conversation about what their role will be so that we can communicate to our public what to expect. We do not need unrest in Portland. We do not need violence in Portland. We've got to make sure that any kind of intervention from the federal government is something that we're working on together.
So how does that work together? Like when the federal troops are here and Portland Police, where do your duties combine?
We don't know yet. Literally my wife asked me the other day, what does this mean? And the answer to the question is, I truly don't know, because this has never happened before in Portland in this way. And so, and it's only happened in a handful of cities in the country ever. And so, again, the number one role and responsibility for the Portland Police Bureau is to provide safety and protection to our citizens. I would hope that anyone who comes to engage wants to do the same. I don't have any reason to think otherwise. And so, we've got to make sure that we identify a problem we're trying to solve, that we work together to solve it, and that we are communicating really well with the community about what to expect. And I hope to have that information soon.
Yeah, we're all hoping to get more details on all of this. There are still complaints from the people especially who live here right across the street, that it's noisy, they're not really getting peace at night. So if this deployment of the National Guard troops is blocked today, this temporary restraining order goes into effect, What's Portland Police's plan going forward to maybe address those concerns then, if people are still saying, or they believe that more needs to be done?
So again, it's really, really important that our elected leaders who have a lot of ownership over what the Portland Police Bureau can and can't do. I mean, we've had times where the Portland Police Bureau has come down to address violence in this area. We've had elected leaders criticize the behavior or criticize enforcement, criticize arrests, have questions about people being injured or whatever else. We have to decide as a city what our goals and our kind of the authority we're giving to law enforcement is. Everyone who lives down here just has a right to live down here, you know, go to the businesses and everything else. Again, it's objectively not true that our city is a war zone. It's also objectively true that any violence in our community is really, really disruptive.
Yeah. Aaron Schmautz, President of the Portland Police Union, I really appreciate you being here this morning and giving us that perspective, because it's important from the people on the ground.
Thank you.
So I've got my next live guest here now. I've got Maxine Dexter, Oregon State Representative for District 3. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate it.
It's lovely to be here with you, Leslie.
So from your perspective of what you've been seeing, what you've been hearing from your constituents, what is going on here nightly at the ICE facility?
Yeah, many of my constituents have been engaged for quite a long time, most of them middle-aged women who are just trying to bear witness. After the announcement of troop deployment to our city, it obviously is increased in size every night. And there can be challenges with peace, and I think mostly we're worried about the community around there. There's families that live there. There was a school nearby. So frankly, I think this troop deployment risk or threat has actually escalated the tensions there, which is completely counter to the reason they say that they're coming.
So escalated, but nightmare, war zone, we've heard those words from the president. What's your response to that?
I'm happy to walk the president through our neighborhoods at night. I was just walking in my neighborhood last night for over 2 miles, just looking to see if I could see. We are peaceful. The city is just as peaceful as it's ever been. Portland is rebounding from challenges that we really had from 2020 during COVID and the Black Lives Matter protests. I have to say, he's probably looking at old footage from 2020, if anything, because what has been happening here is largely peaceful protests with occasional aggravated sort of tensions between officials and protesters.
Do you think the city and the state maybe could have done more, you know, in these maybe summer months leading up to this to avoid this sort of attention and this deployment of troops that you say is not necessary?
Yeah, you know, I think that Portlanders care about each other. I know we do. We are a joyful, united community that cares about our neighbors, and people are scared right now. The ICE deployments and increased activity throughout our country is absolutely driving part of the tensions here. And so being at the ICE facility, it's not true and unrelated. It's because people are concerned about the illegal actions, the kidnappings that are happening. So this authoritarian-like action is just further exacerbating the tensions here. So, you know, Portland is showing its resistance, which is its First Amendment right.
You know, and I know we are still hearing some concerns from people who live here, especially right across the street from the ICE facility, about the noise at night, not being able to go to sleep and get some peace. And we know that, you know, a judge recently sided with the city, saying that Portland police are not required to enforce the noise ordinance there. So what do you think can still be done? What are you willing to maybe do as a representative to maybe let these people get some sleep at night?
So we have been very clear that exacerbating the tension between federal officials and the public is not probably serving anyone's best interest right now. It is important that people are bearing witness when folks are trying to go in for their scheduled ICE appointments or their check-ins. We have had, you know, legal observers and volunteers making sure people have access and their lawyers have access. So I would not discourage that. But the protests, like, we can protest in other places and try to remove that. At the same time, it is not my job to tell protesters what to do. But I think right now, this is a dangerous time. We're talking about a Department of War. We're talking about the enemy within, and I shouldn't say we, the Republican leadership is saying that. And it's very dangerous rhetoric. And so to suggest that there is an enemy here within Portland is egregious, it's dangerous, and I absolutely will continue to speak out as a representative against that and stand up to this leadership that is failing our country.
And so we know, the temporary restraining order hearing is happening this morning, should happen at 10.
Yeah.
Now that we know the judge has recused himself, there's a new judge reassigned to the case. Does that change anything of how you think maybe this hearing will go?
Every judge is different. I absolutely trust that the legal parameters and integrity of our judges is going to be maintained. This is clearly an illegal action. There's no rebellion, there's no incursion, there's no inability for our local officials to enforce federal law. So this is an overreach by the Trump administration. I would hope that that is the takeaway for this judge. Obviously, I'm not the legal expert, they are. So I'm sure that if it is perceived as an insufficient response, that there will be further discussion by our Attorney General. Dan Rayfield's been doing an amazing job standing up for Oregon, and I really trust his leadership.
So, looking at this entire situation, why do you think then President Trump is sending the National Guard here and putting so much attention on Portland?
Yeah, he doesn't like our politics. He doesn't like the fact that people stand up against his authoritarian overreach. I think that he wants to make an example of us, and he has seen that Portland steps up in unity and taking dissenting action against what we perceive as illegal action by our government. I think he's trying to provoke us, and that's why a lot of us have said, don't take the bait. We can protest, we can be peaceful, we don't have to do it right at, federal officials who are looking for a fight. And so at this point, I think Donald Trump is coming here. I would be delighted, or the troops are being sent here. I would be delighted if they had nothing to do. It was perceived that this was a misuse of $3.8 million. We need federal help. We don't need federal troops.
Representative Maxine Dexter, thank you so much for joining us this morning for ARC PDX. An important perspective to have.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. A pivotal hearing, as we've been mentioning, attempting to stop the deployment of national troops is set to start at 10 o'clock this morning. Trump administration lawyers filed their response to the lawsuit yesterday, saying that protesters have attacked federal agents and damaged the building. They also claim that Portland police have not responded to their calls for help. The lawyers argue that National Guard troops will only be protecting federal buildings and will not be roaming the city. The state argues that bringing the National Guard will make matters worse and escalate the protests to larger sizes. We talked with Tong Yin, a law professor at Lewis and Clark College, to break down how these arguments could play out in court.
The question is, are the attacks on the ICE building, do those rise to what would legally be considered a rebellion or a threat of rebellion against the government? And I would think that phrase, while it doesn't necessarily require an outright civil war like 1861, is not probably not satisfied simply based on attacks on one federal building, one agency, of which, even if we're calling it attacks, right? I mean, again, the view of the state, I think, is that they're just protests and maybe a few people are out of control, throwing a few rocks or maybe firecrackers or whatever. That factual dispute, I think, will be resolved by the court ultimately. Probably not at the TRO hearing, but ultimately for the preliminary injunction, be some more indication of that. And that would give us a better sense of what the likely ultimate outcome is. If there's a lot of strong evidence that this is not just a little bit of harassment, but that there's, actual serious danger to the building, maybe the administration's argument looks a little stronger. If it's instead, closer to what the state is saying, hey, in the daytime, it's just peaceful protests, and at night, there's some loud noises and maybe a few people get out of control, but there's no real threat to the building, and Portland police has made a few arrests and so on. Is what really does appear to be a better statement of what's happening than I think the administration does not do very well in that first argument. It's possible that a judge would look at this TRO application and say, this is very interesting. The troops haven't done anything yet, but the government says that the troops are only going to be protecting the building. So I don't think there's a need for a TRO right now. That's a possibility. Alternatively, the judge might say, hey, you know what? If that's what you're going to do, government, then you won't mind if I just give a TRO that says that's all you can do. So that could happen as well.
Portland police could not respond to the federal claims in the lawsuit because it is an active case, but they pointed to previous news releases about arrests at the ICE facility. We also learned from an affidavit to the court, PPB says they put in more than 1,100 hours of overtime since the guard deployment was announced, which is costing more than $100,000. PPB also says they put in about half that amount of overtime for the whole month of June when these protests first escalated at the ICE facility. Welcome back, everybody. We are here for ARC PDX on the road. We're in the South Waterfront neighborhood. We are just a few blocks away from the ICE facility in South Portland. To give you an idea of what it's really like here in the neighborhood for the people who live and work here on a daily basis. And now I have a live interview with a person who lives very close to the ICE facility. We are not sharing her identity, and I would like you to explain why you would like us to hide your identity while we do this interview.
Because I am a naturalized immigrant, and currently speaking out about any immigration things is dangerous even if you're a naturalized immigrant.
Okay, all right. Thank you for explaining that. So walk me through what it's been like, really since I think the summer when these protests started picking up, what it's been like here as a resident of the South Waterfront.
So we actually moved during the summer, and I immediately noticed, I was like, oh, there's like a loud chopping noise every night. And I was like, maybe it's a watercraft. And then I was like, oh, there's helicopters flying overhead, quite low. And I even emailed the FAA about it because I was like, hey, no one should be flying this low in this area. Like, what is going on? And then over time, I've realized that it was either ICE or other government entities, and it's just, they're just bothering us. Like, I've talked to multiple neighbors, and they say the same thing. They're like, it's bothering us. Like, we want them out of South Portland. We want them out of Portland.
Besides bothering, can you explain kind of what it has been like, what that sound, what the nightly sound and everything is doing to you?
The building shakes.
Wow.
It like rumbles. There's a chopping sound. On Sunday, I believe they had Blackhawks out because they sounded different than the normal helicopters. They were it was much more intense. Like, I went out at 10:30 at night because we have a balcony, and I heard the noise, and there was 2 of them circling, and it's just like, it's getting on my boyfriend's nerves, and he's very go with the flow. And at this point, he's like, okay, this is annoying. Like, what can we do? And I'm like, nothing.
So President Trump has been calling it a nightmare, a hellscape. He's calling this area a war zone. What do you see as somebody who lives here?
I see a lot of dogs. I see people going on walks and on runs. I see kids running around after school. Yeah, that's about it.
Do you have a message to maybe the national media or the people who are kind of maybe saying those things about this?
Everything is okay here. Like, I just don't understand where that side is coming from. It probably has to do with what happened a few years ago with all the protests, but now it's just condensed down to this one block. And it's because we want ICE out. Like, that's it.
What do you expect is going to happen if and when the National Guard troops are on the ground here at the facility?
I'm hoping that nothing changes, that no one acts out, and we just make them so bored that they leave. Because there's nothing here to do for them.
So the noise is still a concern, though, at night, and it's getting on your guys' nerves. So if the federal troops do not come in, and the hope would be that it would all quiet down. If that doesn't happen, then what happens then? What would you like the city to do or PPB to do?
Well, at that point, just, again, there's nothing I really can do besides email the FAA, be like, hey, these helicopters, they're bothering us. Like,
so it's really the helicopter noise is your biggest concern right now?
And also, what ICE does to the protesters, they throw gas at them, they flash lights at them, and it's just okay, but why don't they care about the people that live in the surrounding area? Because that affects everyone, not just the people that are protesting at the building. And if they cared about the people, then they wouldn't be doing that to the people.
I really appreciate your perspective. It was great to have the voice of somebody who lives right near that ICE facility. Thank you so much for spending the time with us this morning.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. All right. We will be right back after the break. We got a little bit more for you here from the South Waterfront. Welcome back to ARC PDX. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We had a lot of great interviews. We heard from a lot of important people, but I do want to mention we reached out to a lot of people for this show. We've also reached out to Christine Drazen, Cliff Bentz, Alex Garlatos, because we have heard they've had a different perspective than maybe what you heard on this show today, and we wanted to hear from them, but they did not come on our show. So we're going to keep trying to get their voices here, but we wanted to make sure you knew that. We are going to have the latest on the hearing for the temporary restraining order filed by Oregon. That starts at 10 o'clock. We're going to learn a lot more about that today. We'll have that for you on KATU.com. Thanks for joining us for ARC PDX on the road.